The views and content expressed on the Pop Culture Courtroom are provided solely for educational and entertainment purposes and do not constitute legal advice. For any legal matters, please consult with a licensed attorney.
Welcome back to the Pop Culture Courtroom. Today we're going to be looking at Toy Story 2. I'm Matt Hardin.
I am William Mayfield. So I want to give a little bit of background on the entire Toy Story franchise. It started in 1995. It was the first movie done by Pixar, which is fully computer animated and really ushered in a new era for animated movies. The idea came from a short film called Tintin that was made in 1988, and it had some success. So they decided to start with Toy Story. Most of you have likely seen the movie, but it features toys that come to life or were always alive since they were made, and kind of balances the juxtaposition of them trying to hide that from their owners, but also enjoying being played with by their owners and things of that nature. But as many of you know, the two main toys in the movies are Woody the cowboy and Buzz Lightyear.
A little 5-year-old William, I think, saw this movie at the Green Hills Theater as a kid.
I did. What's awesome about this franchise is I saw Toy Story 4 in 2019 when I was 29, and I think I was just as excited about seeing that movie as I was when I saw the first one when I was 5 years old.
Well, I was college age when this movie came out, and I remember being dragged to it by the lady I was dating at that time, and actually really liked it. It's a really good movie.
It is one of those movies where it can be enjoyed by children and adults, and that's a huge challenge, but I think they did really well with it. I was obsessed with Toy Story. All my Christmas list growing up was littered with Buzz Lightyears and Woodies, and I think that's helped keep the franchise alive because there's lots of different mediums where this can be shown and dealt with. It can, in addition to being a movie, these are toys that kids actually enjoy playing with.
These movies are really interesting in the giving human characteristics to these toys. It's a world that people are, for the most part, other than maybe Sid in the first movie, are unaware that these toys come to life, or they would likely treat these toys quite a bit differently than they do.
We're talking about a scene from Toy Story 2 today, but I want to give a little background on Toy Story 1 to help us get there. The biggest plot point in Toy Story 1 was Woody was kind of the king of the toys. He was Andy's favorite toy, and then he gets this fancy new Buzz Lightyear here that we have displayed on our table for those listening and not watching. Andy, as most kids are, is kind of fascinated by his new toy and maybe neglects Woody a little bit, and that creates jealousy, which is going to become important in our analysis later because that's a human emotion. And so much of the plot point is on Woody trying to basically do kind of nefarious things to get Andy's favor back. And by the end of it, it's a kind of a heartwarming story of how they come together and realize that they both just need to be the best toy they can for Andy. And so that leads us to movie 2, where Woody, trying to help another toy who was potentially going to get sold at a yard sale, Wheezy, in trying to prevent him from getting sold, he actually gets picked up by Al from Al's Toy Barn, who has been looking for a Woody doll to finish off his collection. So he takes him. Obviously, Woody is not a toy that Andy was intending on selling, but he's taken by Al, and the toys, led by Buzz, see that, and they have set off to rescue Woody from Al's Toy Barn.
Al is played by Wayne Knight, who most people know as Newman on Seinfeld, and he plays a good villain in here. He just straight robs Andy's family to get Woody and take him back and complete this collection of rare Woody's Roundup toys, which is essentially a puppet show that's looks like it's from the 50s. Matter of fact, it brings up something interesting. They show a Life magazine cover from January 12th, 1957. That's 68 years ago. So Woody the toy is an elderly chap in these movies.
Yeah, and that was one thing I wanted to ask you about is when they wrote Toy Story 1, do you think that they had this conceptualized at all, or is this kind of like revisionist history where they came up with this backstory for Woody because it kind of made sense for what they were trying to do in Toy Story 2?
Well, I mean, this first movie came out in 1995. The second one's 2-3 years later, I believe. There weren't a lot of sequels done of animated movies at that time. I mean, they tended to be more like the straight-to-video. Tom Hanks and Tim Allen are not going to be playing Buzz and Woody in the direct-to-video or direct-to streaming, which is how we look at it today. But this was a full bore, sequel like Godfather 2 or something, where they're trying to go all out, and we'll talk about this later. In my opinion, made a better movie than the first one, but we'll talk about that in a bit.
It's interesting you say that, because I was reading up and preparing for today. They originally did envision this as a direct to TV movie, and then the quality and how popular Toy Story 1 was, and they realized it needed to be bigger than that. And it certainly was.
In a movie from around this same time period was Aladdin, which, Robin Williams played the genie in. Great movie. They did that. I think they made one or direct a home video called The Return to Jafar, and it is not the same quality as Toy Story 2.
While I like Toy Story 1 better, I do think Toy Story 2 certainly holds up. So in this scene that we're going to talk about today, the toys, Buzz, it's Rex, it's Slinky, it's Mr. Potato Head, they are contemplating crossing the street to get to Al's Toy Barn so that they can go save Woody. And there's going to be a lot of hecticness that ensues with this.
I think Ham is there too. I think that's the name of the
yep.
bank, which I thought was funny.
He had, I can't remember the amount of money that he had, but I think it was like $6 or something inside of him at the time.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff going on here with these toys, about their human characteristics that they have. They end up walking around 20 blocks or so from Andy's house to get to Al's Toy Barn. They're expressing that they're tired, their legs hurt. It's interesting. They kind of turn that on and off, the filmmakers do, based on whatever they need to be doing with the plot. For example, Andy's arm gets ripped off in this, where the stitching comes undone, and the cleaner comes in and, polishes him up and just sews his arm, and there's, it hurts to walk, but it doesn't hurt to get your arm torn off and reattached. So,
yeah, that's called creative liberty, and it's often very inconsistent. So that speaks to, I think we're both going to agree that these toys were sentient creatures. They've taught apes how to do sign language in the past, but a very interesting fact about that I learned the other day, an ape has never asked a question in sign language. It's probably like me as a child. I was just concerned with what I was doing. I didn't care about what anybody else was doing. Yeah. But that's these characters, they express fear in crossing the road. They're trying to think through crossing the road. How can we do this safely? I think at one point Mr. Potato Head goes, "You're not going to turn me into a mashed potato."
And he's the one that almost gets mashed in the scene.
So they're looking to cross the road. They're trying to go save Woody from Big Bad Al. The toys concoct this plan to cross the road. The thing that's a constant theme of these movies is they don't want humans to discover that they are sentient, that they can talk, that they can move. Why? I don't think we ever really fully know why that is. But it's the world that we live in, and it kind of makes sense for the plot point, and that's just a huge theme. So they hide under traffic cones. That, to me, is mistake number one. While they're hiding that they're toys, it's pretty impractical to think that like 7 squirrels are going to get together and hide under traffic cones and start crossing the street.
If I don't see Rex going across, or Buzz trotting across the road, if I see moving cones, I'm thinking that's pretty strange too.
Absolutely. And it goes back to our theme here, that in terms of the law, I think we're going to treat these toys like humans, because I don't think, well, actually, I know that there's no animals that are going to make a conscious decision to hide under traffic cones and in an organized manner cross the street.
Well, and we've hinted on this before in another podcast, but animals causing wrecks, the most common thing would be a deer. Those typically are not going to be compensable for your injuries. If you hit a deer, runs across the road, you can't see it. Those things can do tremendous damage to vehicles. They can cause very serious injuries to folks. But ultimately, you can't sue Bambi. You can't sue Bambi's dad. You're basically stuck with a property damage claim, and it's unfortunate. Basically, any animal you hit, other than a horse or a cow that's gotten loose from a farm and they haven't done anything about it, those animals weigh a ton, and if you have a damaged fence and your cow's gone a couple of days and you haven't done anything about it, that's actually something that could be compensable. But coming back to the toy part, they're trotting across this road, and there's essentially a crosswalk that's relatively close, you can see in this scene, but again, they're toys, and even if we look at them as sentient creatures, they're tiny, and it's gonna be awful hard for folks to see them when they're driving down the road.
That's true. That's the interesting part, is I almost think they would have the legal responsibility of like a child, which is not to the level of an adult, and because their decision making isn't quite to that level, but more than an animal.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I thought of that when I rewatched this movie the last couple of days. They can speak, they feel emotions, they can feel tired, they can feel pain sometimes, depending on whether the scene requires it or not. But they are not adult in the way that adult humans would be. They are not a whole lot farther above what the children that they're there to serve or play with.
Yeah, I'd say emotionally immature is probably a good way to describe it. I mean, that's where all the jealousy from Woody comes from in the first movie, and then there's kind of it's almost some like bullying in movie one, when almost like herd mentality of getting frustrated with certain toys who aren't doing things the right way, and they have just kind of childish ambitions. I mean, they're designed to be played with by children, so that's probably who they emulate the most. So before we get into the specifics, we know that they're going to cross the road. We know that they're going to cause harm, but you said something very interesting. You can't sue a deer or a Bambi. That's a wild animal. If you could sue a deer, Bambi would probably be a pretty valuable one to go after. But you can't. But you could potentially sue a farmer who had a cow or a horse get loose. In this film, if you couldn't sue the toys, could you potentially sue Andy or his parents?
Well, we've talked about agency before on our podcast, which is essentially someone being responsible for someone else's behavior. So if you are we have a kid who's a 16-year-old driver, mom and dad own the car, mom and dad provide the gas, they provide the maintenance of the vehicle, they own the vehicle. They potentially can be responsible for that teenage driver getting in a crash. That is why you need to make sure you have lots of insurance if you have your children that are driving and you are responsible for them. A lot of times folks will actually lower their insurance when their kids start driving because the cost is so much more, but there's a reason, because between those ages of 16 to 20, they're way more likely to get in wrecks as they're inexperienced drivers. So this is the same theory for the toys. Andy owns these toys. Andy's a minor in this movie. We see him grow up through the other movies, but at this point, who is the owner of those toys? Can you get at Andy's parents? Well, maybe. If you're in a world where people know that these toys are sentient, there aren't a lot of characters in this series that are human that know that they're out there. Sid appears, I think, is it the third movie where he's a garbage man? And he ends up giving a ride home.
Yeah, I believe so.
And so, I mean, he knows. It's a hard question. I mean, we don't, like you said a minute ago, we don't really know why they don't let folks know that they can speak to them or they feel these human-like emotions. One other side thing I'd say about that, even in 1995, there'd be cameras in a lot of these places or 1997, there'd be cameras. Are they like vampires and like mirrors or where you can't see them, or toys can't be seen on cameras because of their supernatural abilities? I don't know.
So that's one of the fascinating things about this movie that had me thinking is, all right, so our world, nobody can get along well enough to do almost anything, right? I mean,
that's unfortunate.
Half the country votes one way, half the country votes another way. There's disagreements like crazy. If you had a big secret that needed to be kept among a large group of people, it would be almost impossible to do that. To our knowledge, Sid is the only person in the human world that has been let in on the secret that toys can talk. And quite frankly, Sid is such an unreliable account, being A, that he's a kid, and B, that he's not a particularly well-behaved kid, that even if he went into a court of law and swore under oath that these toys could talk, I don't think that would be very well believed.
Just like the human world, there are good and bad toys in this universe. The Lotso bear, he gets hurt by getting rejected. His owner leaves him behind at a picnic or something and gets replaced like it's nothing. Well, he turns evil. The fourth movie, you've got that creepy doll from the antique store that you find out same things happen. She's gotten rejected. Her voice box doesn't work and make some questionable decisions. Sometimes they get redemption, sometimes they don't. But I mean, Lotso's got a whole crew of critters that are helping him out at the toys that are helping him out at the daycare. So, I mean, are they going to keep that secret? I mean, unless there's some force out there that does not allow them to do it for purposes of this universe, somebody would definitely expose themselves.
And that's where I was going with this. Common theme throughout the entire movies is that the humans don't know the toys are sentient. And to me, where my mind went was, I don't know if it's some sort of automatic force. I don't know if it's magical. I don't know if they're under threat of punishment. I don't know what it is. But for whatever reason, for all of these toys in this universe to have uniformly been able to hold this secret for as long as they have, I think there's got to be something out there that prevents that. And I think whatever it is, I think it could potentially circumvent these cameras and these things, these nature and things of that nature. And so that's what I let myself believe.
Well, movie one, they blatantly go against that when they expose themselves to Sid when he's going to blow up Buzz.
And where my leap with that was that Sid was such an unreliable witness that they are okay with him having seen it because they know he couldn't convince anyone else. But that's a large decision for Buzz and Woody to be making for the entire toy universe. In the first movie, Buzz doesn't even think he's a toy. And he still naturally kind of falls in place and goes where he was when Andy comes in the room. So it almost makes me think it's some like automatic thing instilled in them that naturally happens.
But we never know how they just turn it off to go save, Buzz when he falls off the windowsill and goes into Sid's yard. The torture that the Sid's toys have gone through. I mean, he's tearing them apart. He's, using erector sets with like doll heads on them and things. I mean, there's some dark things going on over at Sid's house.
See part 2 for our hour-long podcast on the plot holes in Toy Story. But
so this is one of our favorite things to do, is for William and I to second guess geniuses that come up with all this wonderful these wonderful movies and shows that we like to pick apart because we're attorneys and that's the type of thing we do. So, well, let's come back to our scene though. They're going across, trying to get to Al's toy barn from across the road where they've been on their trek from Andy's house. There's a brief red light, and Buzz motions them out there. So they're trying to obey traffic signals here. Yeah. So if you're a pedestrian, who has the right of way if there's a green light and you're not in a crosswalk? Is it the pedestrian or is it going to be the cars?
If there's a green light, it's going to be the cars.
It's going to be the cars. So I think lots of folks out there think pedestrians always have the right of way. That's not correct.
I went to school in Knoxville, and that was the one place where they instructed that the pedestrians had the right of way on all these walkways and whatnot, and it did not work because all the people who were from out of town obeyed the traffic laws of everywhere else, and so it's kind of like daylight savings time. We got to all get on the same page.
Yeah, and if you're lawfully in a pedestrian crosswalk, you've got the white signal to go across, and you get hit by a car or somebody turn on that road, they're going to be held liable, and we could pursue a case on that. Often those injuries are just devastating because you've got cars and motorcycles weighing hundreds and even thousands of pounds that could do a lot of damage to a person. If you're out in the middle of a road, it's going to be a lot harder case unless the other person is speeding or has alcohol or something like that on board.
Yeah, we've talked about it before, but we have modified comparative fault in Tennessee, and if you're 50% or more at fault for whatever happened to you, unfortunately, you're not going to recover here, and so that becomes the problem if you're unlawfully out in the middle of a roadway.
Well, I mean, there's some devastation caused by this decision of these toys to go across the road here. Right off the bat, when they're just in the first lane and have the cones kind of haphazardly put there, car has to slam on its brakes, rolls over one of those do not go over reverse type things where it pops their tires, their airbag goes off. Somebody could have gotten injured there. I mean, they're going pretty fast for this being a city streetway.
I love the fact that this was just kind of a normal roadway in a city, and randomly there happened to be spikes that person went over. So they're playing up the damages here.
Well, the next thing we see, though, is the car going past them, and the hubcap somehow goes backwards. Back into scene. We don't see what it crashes into, which is likely rear-ended in some other car in order for that to reverberate and go back the other way. That's probably a second injury. Then we see what looks to be a giant concrete sewer culvert or drain pipe of some type that's on the back of a flatbed truck, where that thing's slamming on its brakes. It's jackknifing. Mr. Potato Head loses his foot and some gum and almost gets rolled over by this thing, but miraculously gets it out of the way. That thing jackknifes, and then it rolls off. They show this scene. There's just damage everywhere. There's multiple people that are going to be injured from this, and tens of thousands of dollars in property damage.
Yeah, I think that rolls into a telephone pole. They show the telephone pole crashing down. And so that brings up something that I want to talk about, which legally is called fruit of the poisonous tree, but really just means when bad things happen that are really kind of a domino effect of the original negligent act, can that original negligent actor be held liable?
We have in Tennessee and many other states what's called comparative fault. So that doctrine's a little bit different. So fruit of the poisonous tree often meant that if you cause the original negligence, you have trouble recovering from the things that follow from your negligence. So, here, if Mr. Potato Head had gotten squished because of that and damaged that $5 toy, the talking toy, which if he's talking, he's probably worth millions. You got a plastic toy that is a sentient being that can talk. But as a property damage claim, if he's not able to talk, that's a $5 toy. My thought on that is the comparative fault of all the toy band that's crossing the street is going to be so high that they're going to recover nothing. There'd have to be just some egregious circumstance for them to recover anything from, say, that truck driver. Maybe he's going, it seems like the jackknife like that. Most cities, you're going 25, 30 miles an hour. They seem to be going a lot faster than that on this road.
Yeah, and that would be kind of the variable for me is, were they doing anything additionally wrong? So I originally, when I first saw the scene, was thinking maybe you could hold the company accountable for not properly securing the large cylinder that fell off. But it was probably properly secured for its designated purpose. And the way in which that jackknifed through was probably not super foreseeable in terms of needing to secure it in that way. And quite frankly, it might not be possible.
And I like where you went with that. The foreseeable harm. Could this trucking company, who is likely hired from wherever Andy City is to bring this culvert for them to do road work with it or sewer work with it, was it foreseeable that toys were alive?
Yeah.
And that these toys friend would get stolen from a dastardly toy store owner,
Yeah.
and that they would go rescue him and cross the street? That's quite elite.
Absolutely. And so I the next place that my mind went was, well, these are cones. Drivers in Tennessee have a duty to keep a proper lookout. There very well could be cones in the street that you need to avoid or go around. You see it all the time when people are doing construction. But the two big factors here for me, one, these are not very large cones. You wouldn't just stick a 1 foot tall cone in the middle of the road. You'd probably stick one of those larger ones or the barrels. And then number two, and the biggest factor, is these cones weren't there very long. They were there for a second or two, and they were moving. You could have been driving 30, 40 yards away and not seen them, and then all of a sudden they got put out there. So I don't think that's going to be a problem.
So I in watching this scene, I thought the person that was going to have the hardest time with their claim was the first car whose airbag goes off that goes over and pops their tires. Because at that point, they're essentially just blocking one lane. Those folks are coming off a red light to a green light. They need to be paying attention. So I think they're the ones in this scene that are going to have the hardest time recovering.
I agree. All in all, I still think that they will recover, but I think they might get hit with a portion of fault for not keeping a proper lookout.
There's actually a few other car scenes in this movie that are interesting. When they finally get into Al's Toy Barn, they happen upon Barbie's beach party. That's where all these toys express that they are romantically interested in other toys because they see some pretty girls and they're very excited about it. The Mr. Potato Head said he's a married spud over and over again. Anyways, Barbie jumps in the car, tour Barbie jumps in the car and starts driving around quite recklessly. She actually crashes into a giant, rubber ball display that goes everywhere. And then later on in the movie, Buzz slips and falls on these things. So if the store is potentially on notice that these toys are there, does Buzz Lightyear potentially have a claim against Al and whoever owns Al's Toy Barn?
So this is kind of a multi-layered answer for me. One, how did they clean up all that mess in time for Al to not know that the toys have caused this damage, or did they just try to pin it on like a child or something? How did they hide their sentient nature?
The other scenes, if Andy left Buzz somewhere, he goes back to where he was. Woody goes back to where he's left. We don't see anything where these toys in the toy store attempt to pick up any of this massive mess they make.
No, so presumably it's there when Al gets there, and he has to have some reason to know about it. And maybe that actually is a positive fact for recovering against him. If this is a common scene for Al, he keeps getting to the toy store and toys are all over the place and things aren't as they left, he would naturally need to investigate that. Why is this happening?
Well, what's the important thing about a slip and fall case? What is the number one thing that's the hardest thing to prove in those cases?
Notice. Notice is, did the potentially liable party know that the hazard was there, or should they have known that that hazard was there? And then the second part of that would be, is it open and obvious? In this case, I would say that it's not, that part is not going to be as difficult. These are small toys, but they're still something that a person could naturally trip on. But yeah, notice is going to be a big deal. And if this has been happening a lot in the past, or, if those toys have been sitting there for hours upon hours, that's going to be a negative fact for Al.
Yeah, and Al's a dirtball. I mean, I don't think he'd hold up very well in a deposition or at trial. If you're there for several days, you can, folks can hide themselves for a few hours, but ultimately who you are is going to come out in a trial. And juries tend to, if they have somebody unlikable like this, are going to tend to go, you got Buzz Lightyear on the other side, remarkably likable. And so I don't know that juries don't often make decisions just based on sympathy. They're usually going to base it more on the justification of the case. Did they have valid injuries? Did they try to make the best of things? Folks that try to make the best of things always are going to do the best with any type of recovery, whether it's a settlement or in a trial, because I think juries and people in general just want to see you doing everything you can to get better from whatever happened.
For sure. And I think that this scene brings up an interesting topic, which is, in my opinion, if you can hold these toys liable for negligence against another party, and they're sentient enough to qualify for that, I think they should certainly be considered sentient enough to qualify to recover if someone else is negligent against them.
From this particular scene, Barbie knocks the balls over. They're there for 20 or 30 minutes because the toy store Buzz is up there climbing up the elevator shaft with them. The original Buzz, our Buzz, doesn't seem particularly injured from his fall from the ball. It just kind of delays what he needs to be doing.
In multiple scenes in Toy Story, we find Buzz and Woody with limbs missing. Toy Story 1, Buzz is missing a limb at Sid's house when all sorts of terrible things are happening to these toys. Now, Woody's is a little bit different. That was when it was involving Stinky Pete and when the arm came off.
Well, originally, the beginning of the movie, Andy's going to cowboy camp. Woody's all excited that he's getting this alone time with Andy. His arm gets ripped right before they're going, not off, but just, the stitches get pulled off, and he ends up getting stuck on a shelf up there with Squeaky. Is it Squeaky?
Yes. Wheezy,
whose squeaker is broken.
Yes, correct.
So Wheezy, who ends up having a lovely singing voice later in the movie, has been abandoned up there. It's all dusty. Woody gets thrown up there. So this idea of being left behind, which is our central theme here. You can get left behind because the child grows up. You can also get left behind because you're damaged goods that can't be repaired.
And so my thought was going to be, could Buzz and Woody, who are presumably worth lots of money. Woody's worth lots of money as is, but especially if they're talking toys. Could they sue? I know Woody's not going to sue Andy. But,
well, the talking thing is only special if we don't know that the millions and millions of toys out there can all talk.
That's a good point. But all right, let's say in Woody's case, he's a very valuable toy, and then he gets his arm torn off. He has been made less valuable. Let's say he was unable to be repaired. Do you think he could sue the person who did that to him? Because he's lost value himself. So to me, it feels like almost like, let's say that you had a good job and you stood to make lots of wages for the rest of your life, and then all of a sudden you weren't able to work anymore. Well, I could see it being in that same category where, since Woody is worth less money than he used to be, he could sue for the loss of value of himself.
Well, and that again is becoming a property damage question more than it is injury to a person. So if we consider Woody and Buzz to be tiny people and all these other toys to be people in some way or another, you can't look at the property damage that way. Property damage is for like cars, things that get damaged, and personal injury matters one way or another. So if we look at it your way, it would be as him just as a toy with special characteristics. It'd be really the value to Andy and Andy's family. We know, what is the museum willing to pay for him versus what is he after he's damaged? The prospector is worth more because he's in his original packaging. That's something in the toy world that. So we're kind of crossing over here again. So I mean, I think if we're going to treat them as sentient creatures who caused a car wreck and can be held liable for that, we're not going to be able to treat them as a property damage in the way that you were talking about.
That's true. That's true. It would be treated more as if he was a human and had that happen to him.
I have one other side thing.
Okay.
So when they rescue at the airport from the airplane, they open up a hatch to the luggage that does not get closed again.
No.
I mean, so when he has to go on and get Jesse off the plane, you have all this luggage everywhere, very heavy. I mean, they make you weigh luggage, so it's usually less than 50 pounds, or you have to pay extra is the real reason. They think it's done so they can see how much fuel they need. But, they get out on the wheel, which is right above this open hatchway. What's going to happen when that plane gets up in that non-pressurized area, that's 5 miles up or more in the stratosphere, and luggage starts plummeting out of that plane?
At the very, very, very least, we are dealing with property damage for all of those passengers and what happens to their luggage. But what is much more likely is that where that luggage falls, causing problems on the ground and potentially causing issues for. I don't think the plane's flight is going to be affected such that it wouldn't at least be able to get back to safety.
It's going to Japan. If the plane to Japan that Al's on, that Jesse and the rest of the toys are supposed to be on to go to this museum in Japan, they're almost instantly going to be over the ocean. And so this idea that of the luggage, could it fall in Hawaii on the way? I mean, I don't even know what the flight path to Japan would be, but it's going to go over some Pacific islands. But it's probably less likely there to be harm, and ultimately the airline's going to it's possible, but likely mostly going to be paying property damage.
No question. So in kind of case or no case, I think we certainly agree that negligence has happened, and there in the particular scene we've talked about today, that there's a lot of damage that results. The more interesting question is who, if anyone, is going to pay. So I think the question here going to becomes where's the source of our money? So we talked about potentially suing Andy's family. I personally don't think that's a non-starter because I don't think they have any reason whatsoever to believe that these toys are real. So I don't think they've done anything negligent. I don't think that would rise to the level of negligence. Another possibility is the manufacturers of these toys. Are they doing something to make these toys alive, and do they have any reason to believe that when they put them out that they're alive? I think it's the same analysis as Andy's family. This seems to be some sort of magical force that's causing these toys to be alive. They don't have like organs. They're not making them in a way that they should be alive. It's just something that is above human understanding. So I think it really falls back on the toys. Well, the toys themselves, other than the $6 in Ham's piggy bank, don't really have it.
That $6 belongs to Andy.
Oh, and that's not even his. That's just borrowed money. They themselves don't have any money. Now, you could make the argument that they are valuable. Unfortunately, if you sue the toys, even if you believe they're sentient, and even if you believe they're adult, to my knowledge, they don't have any assets or possessions. So unless these folks had good uninsured motorist coverage, property damage, and personal injury, if they happen to be injured, they're going to be in for a tough time. They're owed money, but I don't know where they're going to get it.
Yeah, I tend to think they're just property damage claims too, and that's again why you need to always make sure you're well covered, because don't assume that the people or the sentient toys that cause your injuries are insured.
Absolutely. Well, let's move on to relevant evidence. This is a very famous franchise. One of the very rare situations where both the original and the sequel have a 100% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, and that's incredibly difficult to achieve. So we decided to do what we always do, which is nitpick. And we are going to talk about the order of the movies that we like and why the other person is wrong.
All right. I would go with Toy Story 2, number 1, Toy Story 1, number 2, Toy Story 3, number 3, and Toy Story 4 should not even be on the list, but I will give it a distant fourth. Not on the podium. No medal.
So I'll start where we agree. I do think Toy Story 4 is the worst movie. I don't think it's particularly close. I'm a little bit different with some of this stuff. If it provided me some joy, I'm still glad it was made. And it did in the form of Forky, who I think is an unbelievable character.
I do like the Duke Kaboom character from the fourth one that Keanu Reeves plays. He's a fun character, and I agree. The Forky's is amusing. I mean, it's my big problem with the fourth movie is we've taken the storylines from being living with love of the children and your family community you've created being paramount in these lives to Woody deciding to be a carny with Bo Peep.
I didn't like this storyline as much. It was very sad ending to me, especially that Woody and Buzz are getting separated. That to me was particularly sad because at the end of the first movie, the whole lesson was they knew Andy was going to grow up, and they still said, well, at least we'll have each other for infinity and beyond. It does appear that they're going to get back together in Toy Story 5. So whatever they blew up, they might be resolving. But yeah, Toy Story 4, Forky's my main takeaway. Sometimes my wife will get mad at me for not taking out the trash, and then I'll go, trash! Like Forky in the movie, and then she's not mad at me anymore. It's a great little cheat code. But and then I have to take out the trash anyway. But I digress. Toy Story 1 is my favorite movie. Obviously, there's some sentimental value there. It's probably like my first movie I loved. I was obsessed with Toy Story. It's one of the main reasons I want to do this podcast. I just loved it. I could watch it over and over. The introduction of these characters and the storyline was just super, super compelling to me because it somehow made Woody and Buzz main characters. And it was almost like two movies for me. And I loved all the fun space age stuff that you got with Buzz not knowing that he was a toy and kind of the innocence of that. And then I loved Woody kind of trying to keep power, and then but really the clincher for me was that final scene when they use RC car and they end up using a bomb that had been, or I guess a firework that had been strapped to Buzz and shooting into the air. And they ultimately come together and they end up in the moving van with Andy, and it's just a great story. And then they end it with the army men scouting out the presents again, and there's a Mrs. Potato Head, and so it kind of lets you know maybe they're planning on continuing with this. Honestly, the reason why I prefer Toy Story 1 to Toy Story 2, and this is probably going to offend some people, but I wasn't overly interested in the Woody's Roundup backstory. I liked cowboys and when I was growing up, but I felt like what I liked about Toy Story was the fancy Pixar. These are like toys and action figures, and I think I was partial to Buzz anyway, and so a lot of the cool kind of action features were really more Buzz centered in Toy Story 1. And in Toy Story 2, it was a lot of like black and white backstory, almost like a cowboy type theme, and it just wasn't quite as interesting to me. I actually preferred 3 to 2.
I think the cowboy thing is a function of when the creators grew up, their childhoods. You know, Tom Hanks, child of the 50s, you know, cowboy stuff was still popular to the 60s until the space stuff really took off. So that's essentially what their childhoods would have been. I think they're both great movies, 1 and 2, and I think you can argue back and forth about them. I like the second one more just because the stakes are higher. You know, it's the separation forever. There's 2 very pronounced literary stories you see over and over again in movies and TV, one of which is a stranger comes to town, and the second one is On the Road. And these movies all do those things. You know, the stranger comes to town, and the first movie is, you know, Buzz arriving, and then the On the Road is going to next door to Sid's house, and if you're a tiny toy, that's on the road. This one's the same. The second movie is the same. You know, the strangers that have come to town are all the Roundup gang. You know, Stinky Pete, Jesse, and the horse. 2 of those 3 characters are now in the rest of the movies, and it gives, you know, Woody another surrogate family, you know, to come in where they essentially had fallen out of favor with their owner, weren't loved, and then they get to come be part of another child's family, and then also a toy family. Third movie, you know, Andy's now grown up, and he is not interested in toys, and the toys get donated inadvertently. You know, they don't mean for that to happen. He'd actually had planned, I think, to bring Woody to college with him. He ultimately decides to give him to Bonnie, and by the 4th movie, Bonnie isn't playing with Woody anymore for some reason, so he decides to abandon her and go become a carny.
Which I know is something that you share a strong creative difference with the makers of this movie. And we've
and he also abandons the rest of everybody instead of just bringing, you know, Bo Peep back to the house. where she had been donated and been in this antique store. He goes off with her and chooses himself. And I don't know. That's just against the themes of every other movie where you're putting other people ahead of yourself. And we, frankly, our world's a better place if we're just not living for ourselves.
While we agree on four, I'm not like write an angry letter and mail it off angry about it. But what I will say, one thing, the reason I liked 3 better than 2 is because we get an enemy for all the toys. It's not movie 1 is Woody versus Buzz. Movie 2 is the toys saving Woody. Movie 3 is it's like a game, like a sport almost, because we end up needing all of Andy's and Bonnie's toys to kind of unite against this common enemy in Lotso. And I think that presents a lot of really interesting things because it allows the ensemble cast to star a little bit more. And so that was kind of what I enjoyed there.
Well, there's probably Lotso, though, if you want to look at it from the other side of that, though, he's essentially steering Andy's former toys into the preschool room where they get torn apart, they get slobbered on, they're played with very violently. And he's doing that, if you look at it from a more benevolent standpoint, is to protect the surrogate family he's built for himself at the daycare center.
That's true. And it ultimately kind of ends up being team versus team. And then at the end, they kind of come together and realize they can kind of share that burden. I love all these movies. I don't know that I've rewatched 4. I think I've probably only seen it once.
That's very telling.
But that's telling. I need to get Disney Plus. But I've definitely seen the first 3 quite a bit. 2 was great, and I really loved the Zurg Buzz kind of side story because it was funny. It didn't like.
Oh, the Empire Strikes Back takeoff.
Yes,
That's his
and
father.
they're having this battle through the elevator shaft, and I love when Toy Story will mix like real life and the toy life, because that elevator shaft is somewhere where really nothing significant has ever happened. But there, it's the battle for the empire, So it's funny to see the battle for an empire happen inside of Al's Toy Barn's elevator.
It felt like a bit of a callback to Die Hard.
Yeah. I did like also in 2 that they're like playing the Zurg video game and then they get to act it out in real life. I've done that in college football many times where I play somewhere and then I go actually visit there. So it's cool.
That's where Rex accidentally knocks Zurg over the edge of the elevator and then claims that he's defeated him.
Yes, that's exactly.
That's a total kid thing to claim.
So I like that. But my ultimate is going to be 1, 3, 2, and then 4.
Oh, wow. You put 3 ahead of 2?
I did put 3 ahead of 2.
3 is so dark. It's barely a children's movie.
All's well that ends well.
It's by ending well. Lotso getting hit by bugs on the front of a semi. It seems like a pretty harsh sentence.
Sometimes you reap what you sow.
What about Woody's attempted murder of Buzz in the first film?
Sometimes you don't reap what you sow. It's sometimes that's how the breaks go. But the end of 3 actually. I know people remember the fiery furnace scene and
it's so harsh.
But it ends with him passing his toys on to Bonnie, and it's such a heartwarming spiel that Andy gives, and it's a reminder from these toys that never thought they would have any connection again with Andy, what those toys meant to them. And it was almost like saying goodbye.
I think the reminder to me after the end of the 3rd movie is sometimes you need to leave the awesome ending where it was. I didn't like 3 as much as the other ones, but it's still in the realm of very, very good movie. They should have let it lie. And it's a money grab to do that 4th movie, which has parts of it that are okay, and then some just lunatic decisions.
I want to
what do you think about Woody's role in the Carney? Which game do you think he's going to run?
I'm going to leave this angry letter that you're going to write to you. I think that's the hill the battle you've chosen to fight. And look, if you need me to call a few plays, that's fine. But I think you've got it taken care of. I want to go see some new Toy Story movies with my kids, and someday. And I think that while these movies are probably not going to be as good as 1 and 2 were, continuing the franchise is like it's the same way I feel when I go to Neyland Stadium because to see a Tennessee football game. I went there when I was 7 years old, saw games with my grandparents and my parents, and the fact that I can still do that, almost 30 years later
Well, if toys can be alive, does that mean things like footballs can be alive? Because I have some questions for some of those footballs for maybe the 10 years before these last couple of years for Tennessee, where maybe the football could have helped us a little bit more.
I totally agree. Those are more directed at the refs for me, but
we never should have hired Zerg as that last coach.
Yeah. But I had a bad stage when I was, I think, around 5, where I just constantly wanted my toys to be alive. So any excuse I could to tell my parents that I think this is in a different spot that I left it. I mean, I was sold. I think by 6, I was probably cured of that. But so it was, I was that into it. I wanted Buzz and Woody to hang out with. I didn't have any siblings, so they would have been great brothers. Well, this is a fantastic film franchise and something great to watch with your kids, and I've had a bunch of fun talking about it today.
And thanks for joining us here in the Pop Culture Courtroom. After this one, we're going to start going to every other week for the podcast.
Thanks for stopping by.
And stay classy, Nashville.
The Pop Culture Courtroom is a Matt Hardin Law production.
If you've been involved in a car wreck or any other type of personal injury or wrongful death case, check us out at matthardinlaw.com or give us a call at 615-200-1111.